What happens when humans cross paths with nature's most powerful predators? Bears may seem majestic from a distance, but they can be terrifying killers up close. One mistake, one wrong move, and an ordinary day can become a fight for survival. From campers and hikers to police officers and even children, no one is truly safe in bear territory. These encounters show how quickly a peaceful moment can become a nightmare. Some fought back, while others never stood a chance. In March 2025, the cold winds of Siberia swept across the dense forests near Taiga, Russia. A police team of 6 officers, led by Dmitry Zaitsev, was assigned to patrol the remote roads near the forest. The experienced law enforcement members had spent the entire day responding to reports of illegal hunting in the area. As the sun set, they took a short break, parking their police van near the edge of the dense woods. The team, including officers Mikhailov, Ivanov, Petrov, Sokolov, and Lebedev, had worked together for years. They were used to harsh conditions, long hours, and the unpredictable dangers of the wild. Despite the risks of patrolling such an isolated region, they remained confident in their abilities. Their vehicle was sturdy, their weapons were loaded, and their training had prepared them for nearly every scenario. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Unbeknownst to them, a starving Russian grizzly bear had desperately searched the forest for food. The harsh winter had left it weak and ravenous. The scent of food from the officers' supplies attracted the massive animal, leading it to their parked van. It remained hidden among the trees, watching and waiting for a while. Then, driven by hunger, it made its move. Without warning, the enormous bear charged at full speed, slamming into the side of the van with incredible force. The metal groaned under the impact as the officers, startled by the sudden noise, reached for their weapons. But before they could react, the bear had already torn through the door. Dmitry Zaitsev was the first to be grabbed, his body yanked from the vehicle in a matter of seconds. His desperate screams echoed through the cold air as the bear sank its teeth into him, dragging him away from the van. Mikhailov managed to grab his rifle, but before he could fire, the bear knocked the weapon from his hands and clamped its jaws down on his shoulder, tearing into his flesh. The other officers, now in a full state of panic, grabbed whatever they could: batons, knives, even their bare hands. But the bear was unstoppable. Ivanov and Petrov attempted to escape through the back door, but the bear turned its fury on them next. Claws and teeth ripped through their bodies as they struggled to break free. Sokolov and Lebedev tried to fight, but the sheer size and strength of the bear overwhelmed them. Within minutes, the last of the officers fell, their bodies left lifeless inside and around the van. By the time the sun had completely set, silence had returned to the forest. The once active police unit was gone. The bear, now covered in blood, stood victorious over the destruction it had caused. The remote Siberian landscape held no witnesses, and hours would pass before anyone realized what had happened. The bodies of the 6 officers remained in and around the police van as the night grew colder. The grizzly bear, still hungry, lingered nearby, occasionally sniffing the ground before retreating into the forest. Hours passed without disturbance. The radio inside the vehicle crackled with incoming messages, but no one was left to answer. Concern grew at the Taiga Police Department when the officers failed to check in. Repeated attempts to contact them went unanswered. A second patrol team was dispatched before dawn to investigate. The roads leading to the forest were covered in a thin layer of frost, slowing the journey. The officers, expecting nothing more than a simple vehicle breakdown, were unprepared for the sight that awaited them. As the first rays of sunlight touched the treetops, the rescue team arrived at the scene. The van's side door was torn apart, and deep claw marks were visible along the metal frame. Nearby, the officers' weapons and personal belongings were scattered across the ground. Then, they saw the bodies. Dmitry Zaitsev's remains lay a few meters away from the van, partially buried in the snow, his uniform ripped apart. Mikhailov's body was slumped near the vehicle, his shoulder covered in deep bite wounds. The others were found nearby, their injuries severe and their faces barely recognizable. The team immediately called for reinforcements. Soon, more officers and medical personnel arrived, but they could do nothing. The entire unit had been wiped out. The brutal nature of the attack made it clear that no one had survived long enough to call for help. Authorities quickly launched a search for the bear responsible. Experienced trackers examined the area, following the large footprints leading into the trees. It did not take long to find the animal. The bear was still in the forest, resting near a patch of frozen ground. Its fur was stained with blood, and its movements were sluggish. When approached, it showed signs of aggression, but it was clear the animal was weak from starvation. A decision was made to put the bear down. Shots rang through the air, and within moments, the threat was eliminated. Wildlife experts later examined the bear's body and confirmed it had been struggling to find food due to the harsh winter. The deaths of the 6 officers sent shockwaves through the Taiga Police Department. Colleagues mourned their loss, and local news covered the tragic event for weeks. Authorities reminded residents of the dangers of wild animals, urging caution in remote areas. Special measures were taken to prevent similar attacks, including stricter patrol protocols and improved emergency response systems. The officers' families gathered for memorial services, honoring their bravery and dedication. In the forests of Siberia, the land remained unchanged, untouched by human grief. The tragedy became another reminder of nature's power and the harsh reality of life in the wild. In June 2024, Frank and his 14-year-old son Mason camped in a national park in the northwestern region of Wyoming. Dense forests and towering mountains surrounded them, creating a peaceful setting. Frank had always loved the outdoors and wanted to share that passion with Mason. It was their first camping trip alone together. He had taught his son how to build a fire, cook over an open flame, and stay safe in the wild. Mason was excited but a little nervous. He had read about bear attacks before, but his father assured him they had taken all necessary precautions. Their food was stored in a bear-proof container, and they had bear spray with them. As the sun set, they sat by the fire, discussing their plans for the next day. Mason wanted to go fishing at a nearby river, and Frank promised they would wake up early to do just that. That night, the forest was quiet. The stars shone brightly above them, and a cool breeze rustled the trees. But deep in the woods, a hungry grizzly bear was wandering. The bear had been struggling to find food, and the scent of their campfire and stored food led it straight to their tent. Just before dawn, Frank stirred in his sleeping bag, sensing movement outside. A heavy sound, like deep breathing, came from near their supplies, and his heart began to pound. He unzipped the tent slowly and peeked outside. The massive grizzly stood only a few feet away, sniffing the air. Its dark eyes locked onto him, and he knew they were in danger at that moment. Thinking quickly, Frank grabbed a flashlight and banged on a metal cup, trying to scare it away. The bear hesitated, then took a step closer. Desperate, he threw a rock, hitting its shoulder. That was a mistake. The grizzly growled and lunged forward, charging straight at him. Frank was knocked to the ground as the bear swiped at him with its powerful claws, tearing through his jacket and cutting into his skin. Pain shot through his body as he struggled beneath the weight of the massive animal. Mason woke up to the noise and saw his father working. Without thinking, he rushed forward, trying to pull the bear away, but the bear turned its attention to him. Mason screamed as the bear knocked him down, its sharp claws cutting into his back. The grizzly bit down, shaking him violently. Frank forced himself up despite his injuries, reaching for anything he could use. His fingers closed around his hunting knife. He plunged the blade into the bear's side with all his strength. The bear roared in pain, releasing Mason and stumbling back. Frank stabbed it again, forcing it to retreat. Bleeding, the bear finally turned and ran into the woods. Frank crawled to his son, holding him close. Mason's breathing was weak, his face pale from blood loss. He whispered something, then went still in his father's arms. Frank held his son close, his hands shaking. The cold morning air surrounded him, but he barely noticed. Mason lay lifeless in his arms, his body still and covered in deep wounds. Frank whispered his son's name, hoping for a response, but there was none. His chest tightened as the realization sank in. Pain shot through Frank's body as he tried to move. His arms and back were covered in gashes, and his clothes were soaked in blood. His vision blurred, but he knew he had to get help. He reached for his phone, his fingers numb and weak. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. With shaking hands, he dialed for emergency assistance. His voice was hoarse as he gave their location. The dispatcher told him to stay awake and keep pressure on his wounds until help arrived. Time passed slowly as he sat there, holding Mason. The forest was silent again, as if nothing had happened. Frank's thoughts raced. He had planned this trip to create memories with his son, but now he was leaving with unbearable loss. He blamed himself for not doing more to protect Mason. After what felt like forever, approaching footsteps broke the silence. Park rangers and paramedics arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dim light of morning. They rushed to Frank's side, assessing his injuries. When they saw Mason, their expressions darkened. They confirmed what Frank already knew. Mason had not survived. The medics helped Frank onto a stretcher, carefully bandaging his wounds. He barely noticed as they carried him away from the campsite. His mind was stuck on the moment when Mason had taken his last breath. The helicopter arrived shortly after, taking him to the nearest hospital. The journey was a blur. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to treat Frank's injuries. His wounds were deep, but he would survive. The physical pain was nothing compared to the grief that filled him. He stared at the ceiling, feeling numb. The weight of what had happened crushed him. News of the attack spread quickly. Wildlife officials tracked down the grizzly responsible for the attack. They found it deep in the woods, weakened from its wounds. To prevent further danger, the grizzly was put down. Some people agreed with the decision, while others believed it was following its instincts. Mason's death shook the community. Friends and family gathered to support Frank, but nothing could take away his sorrow. The funeral was quiet, with loved ones remembering Mason's kindness and adventurous spirit. Frank sat in silence, unable to believe his son was gone. Days turned into weeks, but the pain did not fade. Frank struggled with guilt, replaying the events in his mind. He knew he had done everything possible, but it did not feel like enough. The scars on his body would heal, but the loss of Mason would stay with him forever. In July 2024, Sam Whitaker, a dedicated and experienced park ranger, patrolled the vast wilderness of a national park in northwestern Montana. He had spent years protecting the park's wildlife and ensuring visitors remained safe. He knew the land well, from the deep forests to the cold mountain lakes. His work often took him into remote areas where he monitored animal activity and checked for any signs of danger. The sun shone golden that morning as Sam set out on patrol. He carried his usual gear, including a radio, bear spray, and an emergency firearm. Though he had encountered many wild animals before, he always remained cautious. The national park was home to a large population of grizzly bears, and summer was a time when food became scarce, making some bears more aggressive. Sam noticed recent bear activity as he followed a narrow trail near a lake. Claw marks on trees and overturned rocks suggested that a large grizzly had been searching for food in the area. He remained alert, scanning his surroundings carefully. The sound of rustling bushes nearby made him stop. A massive grizzly bear stepped out of the trees, its powerful body towering over the ranger. Sam immediately recognized the bear's tense posture. It was not just curious, it was agitated. Likely struggling to find food, the bear saw Sam as a threat or a potential meal. Understanding the danger, he followed his training, slowly backing away to avoid startling the animal. However, the bear suddenly charged before he could create a safe distance. With only seconds to react, Sam turned and ran toward a nearby tree, hoping to climb to safety. But the bear was too fast. It slammed into him with immense force, knocking him off balance and sending him tumbling down the rocky slope toward the lake. The impact left him momentarily dazed, and before he could recover, the grizzly was upon him again, its powerful claws raking across his body. Desperate to escape, Sam tried to reach for his bear spray, but the bear struck again, sending them into the lake. The cold water engulfed them, and Sam struggled to swim away. The bear, however, was relentless. It grabbed him, dragging him beneath the surface, preventing him from resurfacing. Bubbles rose to the top as Sam kicked and fought, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. The lake quickly returned to its eerie stillness, the only remnants of the struggle being the disturbed water and the slowly fading ripples. The wilderness fell silent once more. Hours later, when Sam failed to respond to radio calls, a search team was dispatched to find him. Following his patrol route, they arrived at the lake, the site of the attack. What they discovered would send shockwaves through the park community. Moving cautiously along the water's edge, the team searched for any sign of Sam. His patrol route had led him straight to this spot, and the churned-up water suggested something violent had occurred. Then, one of the rangers spotted deep claw marks in the dirt near the slope. The ground was torn as if a fierce struggle had taken place. Scattered pieces of broken equipment lay nearby, confirming their worst fears. They called for additional support, and soon, more rescuers arrived with boats and diving gear. The lake's calm water did not reveal what lay beneath, but the search had to continue. One of the divers prepared to enter, knowing that time had already passed since the attack. The icy water made the search difficult, and visibility was low. After several minutes, a shadow appeared beneath the surface. The ranger had been found. The lifeless body of Sam Whitaker was pulled from the lake, his uniform torn and his skin marked by deep wounds from the bear's powerful claws and teeth. The weight of the loss hit everyone at once. Sam had been a skilled ranger dedicated to protecting the wilderness that had taken him. His colleagues stood in silence, processing the tragedy. The news of the attack spread quickly. People who had known Sam shared memories of his dedication and kindness. Visitors who had met him during their trips to the park remembered his knowledge and passion for nature. The entire community mourned the loss of someone who had always put others' safety first. Authorities tracked the bear that had killed Sam. It did not take long to locate, as it had remained near the area. Rangers followed the trail, and after careful planning, the bear was euthanized to prevent further attacks. The decision was not taken lightly, as conservation efforts in the park focused on protecting wildlife. However, once a bear displayed such extreme aggression, it became too dangerous to allow it to remain near humans. Sam's passing left a lasting impact on the national park in northwestern Montana. To prevent similar incidents in the future, officials reviewed safety guidelines, placed more warning signs in high-risk areas, and adjusted patrol procedures to protect rangers better. Training sessions were also increased, teaching staff and visitors how to respond to bear encounters. His family and friends held a memorial in his honor. They shared stories of his bravery, love for the outdoors, and years of service. A plaque was placed in the park to remember him, ensuring his dedication would never be forgotten. Though time passed, the memory of that day remained strong. The attack reminded visitors of the park's wild and unpredictable nature. Visitors continued to explore its beauty, but with greater caution and respect. Sam Whitaker's legacy lived on in the hearts of those who knew him and the very land he worked so hard to protect. In August 2024, Jake and his 16-year-old daughter, Sophie, set out on a horseback trip through the Teton Wilderness in Wyoming. Jake had spent most of his life around horses, working as a guide for tourists and hunters. He knew these lands well and dreamed of sharing his love for the wild with his daughter. Sophie had grown up hearing stories of her father's adventures and had finally convinced him to take her on a long ride deep into the wilderness. The trip was supposed to be a peaceful journey, a chance to bond while exploring the beauty of nature. The morning air was crisp as they rode along a narrow trail surrounded by towering pine trees. Their horses moved steadily over rocky terrain, the rhythmic sound of hooves echoing in the quiet forest. Jake led the way, keeping an eye out for signs of wildlife. Sophie followed closely behind, her excitement clear as she took the breathtaking views. They had already spotted a herd of elk grazing in the distance and a bald eagle soaring high above. Everything felt calm, just as Jake had hoped. The atmosphere suddenly changed as they entered a dense part of the forest. The horses became uneasy, their ears twitching and their movements hesitant. Jake recognized the signs immediately. Something was nearby, something that made the animals nervous. Before he could react, a massive grizzly bear charged out of the thick brush, roaring as it sprinted toward them. The bear crashed into Jake's horse, knocking the animal to the ground. Jake was thrown violently from the saddle, landing hard on the rocky dirt. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to sit up, his heart pounding. Sophie gasped as her horse reared up, nearly throwing her off. She gripped the reins tightly, trying to stay in control, but the bear's attention quickly turned to her. The grizzly lunged at Sophie's horse, its powerful claws slashing at the terrified animal. The horse let out a painful scream as deep gashes tore through its flesh. Sophie clung to the saddle, her fear rising as the animal beneath her struggled to escape. Jake knew he had to act fast. Ignoring the pain in his body, he reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle. His hands shook as he lifted it, aiming at the massive predator. He fired once, then again. The bullet struck the bear, but it barely flinched. It turned its massive head toward Jake, its dark eyes filled with rage. Jake fired again, his mind racing as he realized how little time they had. He fired several more shots, his ears ringing from the sound. Finally, the bear hesitated, backing away slightly. It let out a low growl before retreating into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Jake collapsed to the ground, his body aching from the fall. Blood dripped from his injuries, his breath coming in short gasps. Sophie slid off her horse, her hands shaking as she rushed to her father's side. They had survived, but the terror of the attack had changed them forever. Jake lay on the ground, trying to catch his breath. His body ached from the hard fall, and his clothes were torn and covered in dirt. He could feel sharp pain in his ribs and shoulder, but he forced himself to focus. Sophie knelt beside him, her face pale as she looked at the injuries on his arm and leg. Blood seeped from deep scratches where the bear's claws had torn through his skin. His breathing was heavy, but he knew they had to move before the bear returned. Sophie's horse stood nearby, trembling with fear. Its side was covered in deep wounds where the grizzly's claws had struck. Jake struggled to his feet, pain shooting through his body with every movement. He placed a hand on the horse, feeling its heavy breathing. The animal was still standing, but it was weak from the attack. Jake knew they had to get help as soon as possible. Jake turned to his horse, which had gotten up after the attack. The animal limped, shaken but still able to walk. He reached for his saddlebag and pulled a cloth, pressing it against his wounds. Sophie helped him onto his horse, her hands shaking as she held her injured animal's reins. They had to get back to camp before nightfall. The ride back was slow and painful. Jake winced with every movement, and Sophie kept looking over her shoulder, afraid the grizzly would return. The forest felt different now, no longer peaceful, but filled with danger. Every rustling leaf and distant sound made them nervous. The only goal was to get to safety before darkness made it impossible to see. After hours, they reached the trail leading to their camp. The sight of their tents brought relief, but the fear of the attack still clung to them. Jake slid off his horse, barely able to stand. Sophie quickly helped him to the ground, doing her best to keep him steady. His leg was swollen, and blood still seeped through his torn clothes. Sophie grabbed the emergency radio from their supplies, her hands fumbling with the buttons as she called for help. The signal was weak, but she reached someone after several tries. She explained what had happened, her voice shaking as she spoke. The response came quickly. Help was on the way. As they waited, Jake leaned against a tree, his body exhausted. Sophie sat beside him, her face still pale. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the camp. The silence between them was heavy. The attack had changed everything. The wilderness no longer felt safe. When the rescue team arrived, they quickly assessed Jake's wounds and checked on Sophie's injured horse. Jake was taken away for medical treatment, and the horse was carefully returned to safety. The attack would leave scars, both on their bodies and in their minds. The land they had once loved now carried the memory of fear. In February 2025, a cold wind blew across Anchorage, Alaska, as families gathered at the Arctic Wildlife Zoo. Among the visitors was 10-year-old Ethan Larson, who had come with his parents and older sister. The zoo was one of his favorite places, and he had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Ethan loved animals, especially large and powerful ones like polar bears. He had read about them in books, watched documentaries, and even collected toy figures. Seeing them in real life was always exciting. The Arctic Wildlife Zoo was well known for its polar bear exhibit. It had a large open enclosure designed to resemble the bear's natural habitat, with icy pools and rocky terrain. Visitors could observe the bears from a safe viewing platform, separated by a tall glass barrier and a lower railing. The zoo had warning signs advising visitors not to lean over the barrier, but Ethan was too eager to get a closer look. As they approached the exhibit, Ethan rushed ahead of his family. His parents called for him to slow down, but his eyes were locked on the massive white bears moving through the snow-covered enclosure. The bears were fascinating, their thick fur shining under the winter sun. Ethan leaned over the railing, gripping the edge for a better view. His parents were a few steps behind, taking pictures of the exhibit. Ethan shifted his weight forward just a little too much without realizing it. His fingers slipped from the railing, and before he could react, his body tilted forward. The moment seemed to slow down as he lost his balance. A gasp echoed from the people around him. Ethan tumbled over the barrier instantly and plunged into the enclosure below. The fall was not long, but the impact was hard. Ethan hit the snowy ground, and his body landed with a thud. For a second, everything was silent. Then, panic spread through the crowd as people realized what had happened. His mother screamed his name, and his father ran toward the railing, his face frozen in shock. One of the polar bears turned its head toward the sudden movement inside the enclosure. It had been resting near the pool's edge, but now it was alert, watching the small figure that had entered its space. At first, the bear hesitated, but then it started moving toward Ethan. The boy scrambled to his feet, but there was nowhere to run. The enclosure walls were too high to climb, and the cold ground made it hard to move quickly. Zookeepers rushed to the scene, shouting and waving their arms to distract the bear. Some visitors grabbed their phones, calling for help, while others looked away, unable to watch. Now only a few steps away from Ethan, the bear lowered its head and advanced. The terrified boy had no escape. The crowd held its breath as the inevitable happened. The polar bear moved quickly, its powerful legs carrying it across the icy ground. Ethan tried to step backward, but his feet slipped on the snow. The bear reached him in seconds, knocking him down with a heavy paw. The force sent his small body rolling across the enclosure. Gasps and screams filled the air as visitors watched in horror. Zookeepers continued shouting, trying to distract the bear, but it was too late. The bear pins Ethan to the ground, its sharp claws tearing through his clothes. The boy struggles, his arms flailing as he tries to escape. From above, his parents cry out, their faces frozen in terror. Zoo staff grab equipment, but there is no easy way to reach the enclosure floor in time. Some employees rush to unlock a gate leading inside, but every second feels too long. Within moments, the bear overpowers Ethan. Its massive jaws closed over him, and the struggle stopped. The boy's small frame lay still in the snow. Zookeepers fired noise-making devices to scare the bear away. It hesitated before finally backing off, leaving Ethan motionless on the cold ground. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, but the damage had already been done. Ethan was lifeless, his body marked by deep wounds. Paramedics checked for any sign of life, but they could do nothing. A heavy silence fell over the area as the reality of the situation set in. The zoo was immediately closed, and police launched an investigation. Authorities reviewed security footage and interviewed witnesses. Signs had been posted warning visitors to stay behind the safety barriers, but a small mistake had led to a tragic loss. Officials debated whether additional measures should be taken to prevent such accidents in the future. Ethan's family was devastated. His parents were in shock, unable to process what had happened. His sister, who had been just a few steps away when he fell, was overwhelmed with grief. The family had come for a fun day at the zoo, never imagining it would end in such heartbreak. News of the attack spread quickly, drawing national attention. Wildlife experts discussed the nature of polar bears, explaining that they are powerful predators that react instinctively to sudden movements. Some questioned whether the bear should be euthanized, but others argued that it was only following its natural behavior. In the end, zoo officials decided not to harm the animal, stating that it had not acted out of aggression, but rather out of instinct. A memorial was set up outside the zoo, where people left flowers, stuffed animals, and messages of support for Ethan's family. In the following weeks, parents who visited the zoo held their children's hands tighter, reminded of how unpredictable nature can be. The tragedy cast a long shadow over the community, leaving a deep and lasting impact. In the aftermath, park officials conducted thorough reviews of safety protocols, leading to stricter measures and reinforced barriers. Visitors, once carefree, now approached animal enclosures with a newfound caution, reminded of the fragile boundary between human curiosity and wildlife unpredictability. The heartbreaking loss of a young life served as a stark and painful lesson, a reminder of why these protective measures exist, not just for the safety of people, but also for the well-being of the animals that call the sanctuary home. In October 2023, the cold winds of the Kodiak Islands swept through the dense forests. Eric Hall was an experienced hunter who had spent years tracking animals in the wild. He knew the dangers of hunting in remote areas, but his love for the outdoors always brought him back. Born and raised in Alaska, he had grown up learning survival skills from his father. Hunting was more than just a pastime for him. It was a way of life. On this particular day, Eric set out early in the morning carrying his rifle and gear. He had planned to hunt deer but knew the area was home to much larger animals. Kodiak bears, the largest brown bears in the world, roamed these forests. He had encountered them before, but had always managed to keep a safe distance. This time, things would be different. As the sun set, Eric climbed into a tree stand, hoping to spot a target before returning to camp. A rustling sound in the distance broke the stillness of the forest. He focused his eyes and saw a massive Kodiak bear moving through the trees. Its thick fur glowed under the fading sunlight, and its powerful frame sent a chill down his spine. Eric carefully lifted his rifle, steadying his breath. He knew that he had to make the shot count if he fired. His finger pressed against the trigger, and the sound of the gunshot echoed through the forest. The bullet missed its mark, and in an instant, the bear's behavior changed. Its ears flattened, and its deep, rumbling growl filled the air. The missed shot had turned the hunter into prey. The bear charged incredibly fast, covering the distance between them in seconds. Eric tried to reload, but there was no time. The bear reached the tree's base and lunged, shaking the stand violently. Eric lost his balance and fell, landing hard on the forest floor. Before he could react, the bear swiped at his chest, its sharp claws tearing through his jacket and cutting into his skin. Pain shot through his body, but he knew he had to fight. He scrambled backward, reaching for his rifle, but the bear was faster. Its massive paw pinned him down, and its powerful jaws clamped onto his leg, sending another wave of pain through him. His vision blurred, and his breaths came in short gasps. Desperate to survive, Eric grasped the ground, searching for anything he could use. His fingers closed around a sharp stick, which he drove into the bear's eye with every ounce of strength. The animal let out a deep roar, momentarily stunned. It shook its head wildly, then turned and retreated into the forest. Eric was left alone, severely injured and struggling to breathe. He knew he had to get to safety before he lost too much blood. He crawled toward his camp with no other choice, hoping to make it before it was too late. Eric's body ached with every movement as he dragged himself through the forest. The deep wounds on his chest burned with each breath, and his injured leg throbbed with unbearable pain. Blood soaked his torn clothing, leaving a trail behind him as he struggled to move forward. The cold wind cut through the trees, making his body tremble. He knew he might not have survived the night if he had stopped now. The journey back to his camp felt endless. Every few feet he had to pause to catch his breath. His arms grew weaker, and his vision blurred. He tried to listen for any sounds, fearing the wounded bear might return. The forest was silent except for the rustling leaves and his heavy breathing. The night was closing in, and darkness made everything around him harder to see. After hours, he finally spotted the small clearing where his camp was set up. Relief washed over him, but his strength was nearly gone. He pulled himself toward his tent with the last bit of energy left. His supplies were just a few feet away, but his body refused to move any further. His hands shook as he reached for his emergency satellite phone. The next thing he remembered was the distant sound of an approaching helicopter. The rescue team had received his distress signal and were searching for him. Bright lights shone through the darkness, and voices called out his name. He tried to respond, but his voice was weak. Moments later, strong hands lifted him onto a stretcher. He felt the warmth of blankets around him, but the pain in his body was overwhelming. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to treat his injuries. Deep claw marks covered his chest, and his leg had severe bite wounds. The medical team cleaned and stitched the cuts while giving him fluids to regain strength. Days passed before he was stable enough to talk about what had happened. The attack had left both physical and emotional scars that would never fully heal. News of the incident spread quickly. Other hunters and locals in the Kodiak Islands were reminded of the dangers of entering the wilderness. Many who had known Eric were shocked that an experienced hunter like him had come so close to losing his life. Experts studied the attack and warned others about the unpredictable nature of these large predators. For Eric, the experience was nothing short of life-altering. He had spent years navigating the wild, finding solace in its untamed beauty. But now, the thought of returning filled him with an unsettling dread. The image of the bear, its sheer power, the primal force behind its charge, was seared into his mind, playing repeatedly like a nightmare that refused to fade. Even in sleep, he couldn't escape it. He knew he was lucky. Miraculously, he had survived, but the razor-thin margin between life and death was something he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a close call, but a moment that redefined his relationship with the wilderness. Once a source of comfort, the towering trees now felt like looming sentinels, whispering reminders of what had nearly happened. The forest, which had always been his refuge, would never feel the same again.